Greetings to everyone. I'm Dorothy Parungao, an Erasmus Mundus student under the Archaeological Material Science program from Universidad de Évora, and I'll be presenting a review of Philippine boat-shaped burial markers. So while conventional megaliths have been found in the wider Austronesian region, no conventional megaliths have been found in the Philippine archipelago as of today. And the focus of the review was on the boat-shaped burial markers of the Batanes Islands and the Catanauan, Quezon province, since these locations have the most prominent boat-shaped burial markers. And as we can see, the burial markers are in the shape of a boat, and it becomes necessary to ask, why were the burial markers constructed in the shape of the boat? So as we can see, these burial markers are not, by strictly conventional definition, megaliths. However, they can be classified as monuments with a visible aim to memorialize something. And as theorized by Barnett and discussed in Diliaco, the basic cross-cultural monumental forms are the tower and the mountain. And the tower is the most universal indication of the specialness of a place, and symbolizes a human walking upright among the beasts of the earth, while the mountain is a natural expression of the landscape and has elaborate cosmic iconography. So, why are there no conventional megalithic forms in the Philippines? It's not because the people are not architecturally capable of building megaliths, or megaliths get blown over because of the constant storms and whatnot. Well, the Philippines, being an archipelago, has a culture of disaster, where human-made fixed points such as houses, buildings, are routinely subject to swift natural disasters. And this has shaped the cultural consciousness that resulted in a thinking that is guided by impermanence. And there's also this cosmological narrative about the afterlife in the wider Austronesian region that affected how these megaliths, or how these monuments rather, were constructed. And so another question is, how do we reconcile this thinking guided by impermanence with the aim to memorialize something, like to remember something that is permanent, which is death? And so these boats became a central motive on how the early settlers thought about death and the cosmos. In this review, I had three objectives. The first one is to characterize the archaeology of these burial markers in Catanauan and the Batanes Islands. The second is to explore the sociocultural importance of the markers, considering the neighboring people and Austronesian region. And it is in this part that we also explore the cosmological narratives. And the third one is to compare the boat-shaped burial markers of the Philippines to those of the Southern Scandinavian region. To achieve this, I lifted from the excavation reports and the earlier processed images. I also consulted interpretation studies, of which the main references were Diliaco, Valientes, Dizon, and Mejares. And this goes the same for the earlier comparative studies of Brink and Price and Ballard. Okay, so for characterizing the burial markers, the composition was determined to be limestone and andesite, and there's also coralline limestone for the Catanauan burial markers. The chronology for Batanes Islands was determined to be 1595 plus or minus 70 AD. The other one was unreliable because there was burnt pandan vegetation that contaminated the sample. And the Catanauan burial markers were earlier at 650 to 950 AD. Also, the architecture, the Batanes Island markers were a bit bigger than the Catanauan markers. There were also artifacts found. For the Batanes Islands, there was only a single burial in each marker, and in one marker, they found one adult male and one juvenile. And in the Catanauan markers, there were instances of multiple burials in one marker. And there were also burial jars found. And implantation in the territory for Batanes Islands is mostly oriented towards the sea. And an interesting thing about the Catanauan burial markers is that they were determined to point to the Milky Way, Sirius, and Canopus constellations, and this will be discussed in a bit. So this is a detailed illustration of a boat marker in a locality in the Batanes Islands. And here's also another image of the skeletal remains found in one Batanes Island marker. And there's also the smallest boat marker found in the Batanes Islands. Here is also the map and the orientation of the burial markers in the Batanes Islands. And here is the legend for the burial markers in Catanauan. So the image on the left is a view along the orientation of the burial markers in Catanauan, and it was taken in 2012. However, Diliaco generated a night sky chart back to when the burial markers were arranged or built, and so they found out that the three of the burial markers actually point directly to the two brightest stars at this period, which is Sirius and Canopus. And in this 2-week period of alignment, it was hypothesized that there was an event that could have commemorated the dead who are believed to go home to the stars and the Milky Way. Interestingly, in the Austronesian region, the cosmological narratives about the afterlife are about a sea journey. And it was said that when the Yolngu people die, they are taken by a mystical canoe and through the river of the Milky Way and into the afterlife. And the canoe is sent back to Earth as a shooting star to let them know, or to let their family know, that they have arrived safely. But also, the sociocultural significance of boats in the Ivatan culture and the neighboring culture is that they're viewed as vessels of the dead to the afterlife. They can be viewed as a social unit, since the Tagalog words barangay, which means town, and balangay are actually related. And balangay is a boat used since prehistoric Philippines. And lastly, boats can be social markers, since there are few burial markers compared to the general population. And there might be social stratification of the Ivatans. Okay, so for comparing these ones to the ship burials of the Southern Scandinavian region, the ones of the Southern Scandinavian are earlier and wider in scope. Also, in the morphology, the Southern Scandinavian ones are bigger in dimension, and the dead are placed in actual ships for the Southern Scandinavian ones compared to the Philippines, who are placed in jar burials, and there's rock art in the actual ships. Here we see a boat grave in Denmark. And here's a comparison of a boat burial in Sweden, which is on the left, compared to the one on the right, a boat burial in the Batanes Islands. Here's also an example of the Bronze Age ship carvings at Sweden. Ultimately, the Philippine boat burial markers can be classified more aptly as monuments and make the most sense situated within the cosmological narratives of the Austronesian region. And when compared to the Southern Scandinavian ship burials, it must not be haphazardly concluded that they might be related, but there might be a parallel evolution or an independent invention from both regions. And further research is needed with more excavations into the Philippine burial markers, and it might be interesting to have a different scope of comparison. So here are the references used in these slides. And thank you for your time and keep safe always.